we're again waiting for our CSD representative to achieve a quorum. If we're unable to get that, I hear from legal counsel that I can give my presentations, which will be worth staying for, I hope. But we won't be able to take action on the items on the agenda. There will be a June meeting, but I will be able to at least give my presentations, which will be good for me. Okay, so we're going to wait another 2 or 3 minutes, and if they're not there, we're just going to go ahead and get started with a more informal meeting. So, thank you. There's our quorum walking in the door. Sorry to hit you with that shot, but appreciate it. Okay, Mr. Chair, as long as AGP is ready, we got thumbs up.
Okay.
Staff is ready when you are.
All right, thank you. I'll call to order the May 16, 2018 Los Osos Groundwater Management Committee meeting. Would everybody please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Lead us in the pledge?
Sure.
All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Executive Director, will you take a roll call?
Absolutely. We have Director Cesenia,
Here.
Director Cote,
Here.
and Chairperson Zimmer.
Here.
The minutes note that the county is absent at this time.
Thank you. So we'll move to item 4, board member comments. Are there any comments from members of the board? Hearing none, we'll close this section and move to the consent agenda. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda? Any board members like to comment or make requests to pull anything from the consent agenda and make it an action item? No? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
Actually, we would take public comment
I'm
first.
sorry.
That'd be great.
Do we have public comment on the consent agenda? Consent agenda includes approval of the minutes, approval of the warrants, budgets, and invoice registry. No public comment?
I move that we approve the consent calendar.
Do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay.
I'm ready to call the question there. So we've got Director Cesenia,
Yes.
Director Cote,
Yes.
and Chairperson Zimmer.
Yes. Okay, we'll move to item 6, the Executive Director Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You've got a written report as part of the package, and this is also published online. I thought this would probably be a good time to talk a little bit about our agenda today with respect to an item that I think will be of interest to folks, because I did give it a little bit of mention in my Executive Director report. You'll notice that on our agenda we don't currently have a basin management infrastructure update, and the reason for that is we've got one of our programs, Program C, has a well site that we're looking for, and one of the potential sites has become an item of significant interest to a number of folks in the community. And so what we've done is we're preparing a more complete discussion of that item, Program C expansion well, including a look at alternatives, all the sites that have been examined, the pros and the cons, go into the technical detail, So staff is currently preparing that technical presentation, and that will be available at your June meeting, which will be at your regularly scheduled time that third Wednesday in June. So folks who are interested in diving into the detail on that, we're going to talk about that in detail in June. I did want to note that if you did want to speak about that item, we do have under item 8, one of the last things we do here, an open item for any public comments that are not on the agenda. So if you did want to say a few things about that issue, more than welcome to under item 8. But we are looking forward to a complete presentation of that queued up at our June meeting. Did want to go through a couple of these items briefly. That last time the committee talked a little bit about grant eligibility for projects that remove nitrate from the upper aquifer, and that's something that we're going to bring back. We have looked at the different programs that are currently available, and there are a few that we may qualify for to cover a portion of the capital costs for future nitrate removing facilities. However, O&M costs, which are the majority of that, are not currently grant eligible. There's an update on the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and specifically the basin boundary modification that you received a presentation about last time. And coming up at the Board of Supervisors on June the 5th, staff will present the formal boundary modification to the Board of Supervisors. We heard this last time, and I did follow up with a letter as directed by the committee supporting that boundary modification. But if you want to track that at the Board of Soups level, that will be on June 5. We provide some maps for context on that. A quick update on the Los Osos wastewater project. We have a few additional connections from our last update, but not many. And so there is a process that the county will be going through to agendize and approve some type of a code enforcement to compel folks who haven't had a chance to connect to complete that work. And that currently is planned for first week in August, on August 7th. The plant continues to receive the same peak flows it did at our last meeting, about 0.5 MGD, so running at about half speed there compared to plant capacity. All the recycled water is still going to the Broderson and Bay Ridge leach fields, and you'll see some quantities there. For those of you who are trackers of the Broderson leach field, I did want to provide a few slides just so that you can see what is happening down gradient of the leach field. And so the Broderson site, if you're unfamiliar, is a large, approximately 8-acre percolation field up above Highland, south of Highland Avenue, near Broderson as a cross street. We have a series of wells that are intended to track the water levels that occur down gradient of all that water that's discharged at Broderson. And one of the key wells is this one that's shown here in the yellow, FW6. And that actually has an automated piece of equipment in it that tracks the water level in that well. All the studies that were done predicted that there would be a mound that develops at that well as water is discharged, and that mound was critical to accomplishing the water supply benefits that project proposed, including being able to drive some of that water down into our lower zone. So we are beginning to see the development of a mound continuing. It may be hard for you to see the time axis at the bottom, but things really started to happen in the summer of 2017. Let me get it back here. That's back. There. In summer of 2017, things really started to take off, and since then, approximately 6 to 7 feet of mound has developed at that monitoring well. So we expect that to continue. And the good news is the water is going down to the level where it was expected. It's not moving laterally in these shallower lenses. So it seems like things are working well at the Broderson site. So we'll continue to bring this back to you from time to time for those of you who are interested. With respect to recycled water deliveries in town, in the urban areas, I know we're getting very close on recycled water agreements. On final versions, we'll be going at the CSD level to our Utilities Advisory Committee in June with a completed draft agreement between the county and the CSD, and then hopefully on to our board in July. So the retrofits that are planned at each school site are still planned to be done this summer, and we do expect recycled water deliveries to commence after that. And those are all the significant changes from my last Executive Director's report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Rob, you mentioned 7 feet of mounding, I think, at the Broderson site. What do we expect, say, when at maximum capacity or when we've been putting water in there a while?
I don't have that number right off the top of my head, but I bet there's somebody in the audience who might. I didn't want to put him on the spot, but we'll let him think about it and bring it back. But
it would be along the.
Oh.
I guess I'm looking for maybe a matter scale. Are we halfway there? Do we expect 3 times as much?
Yeah, I don't think we're halfway there.
Okay.
The initial mounting is probably going to be at a greater rate, and then over time, because it's a kind of a cone, it'll start to mount a little slower. The original projections were that it would not reach the shallower lenses.
Right.
So, the closest one or the deepest one of those is around 40 feet or so below surface. So right now we're around 155 below surface, but I don't anticipate it really getting close to that 40-foot level. But
that's a long way to go.
It's quite a long way.
Thank you.
Thanks, Spencer.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I do. I wonder if you could talk for just a little bit, describe this zone of benefit analysis.
Oh, yeah, a little rhythm.
I'm surprised you can't hear my voice without the microphone. Can you describe the zone of benefit analysis that we're deciding not to do because of the expense?
Yeah, and in the early years of the management committee, the approach was going to be that there would be a community-wide special tax measure of some kind to fund both the monitoring and the day-to-day operation of the Basin Management Committee, and also potentially some of the projects. And we had an analysis that was done by a consultant as to how those costs might be managed and spread. And of course, this is just as the wastewater project was coming online and everybody's property tax bills were going up. At that time, it was thought that the electorate may not be in a position to support such a measure, which would require a 2/3 kind of supermajority. And the CSD began to analyze its own internal water rates and was able to build into its rates the Program C project that we need to accomplish. And so some of the immediate need to fund that project was lifted. And so that could come back in the future when we feel like it's the right time. But at this point, it seemed like it was not the best time to bring something forward to the electorate.
And those Program C projects, they're being funded by the management group in general, or are they funded by individual purveyors?
At this point, the only Program C well that's been done was funded solely by Golden State. And the CSD is looking to fund the next Program C well, though that might eventually become a shared asset through some agreement that's not defined right now. But the CSD is prepared in its capital planning to fund that project.
Okay.
Right.
I have one other question.
Sure, go ahead.
Under your heading, Los Osos Wastewater Project Flow and Connection Update, you talk about a possible amendment to the county code or the county plan on your second bullet point.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe that in a little bit more detail?
Probably some very high-level detail. That's primarily looking to compel unconnected properties to connect. So it's not so much a technical adjustment to how the county would manage water or anything like that. It's the enforcement of unconnected properties to make them connect to the sewer project. So county staff is here and may desire to go into more detail, but probably because it's an August item at the Board of Supervisors, there's probably not a lot of draft language available yet on that topic.
Okay.
Yeah.
In other words, the current county code isn't sufficient, or some people feel it may not be sufficient.
That's how I would read that item,
okay.
Yes.
That's all I have.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there'll be a public comment period here very shortly. Just make sure that the board's got the... Yeah, in a second. Usually they ask questions first, and then we'll go to the public.
I have a couple questions here about. So going back to the zone of benefit analysis, were we looking at revisiting the projects? Was that part of the zone of benefit analysis and the actual projects that have been completed and kind of coming back with more of a understanding of what those? Are we still on track is really what our goal was for revisiting that.
Right. At your last meeting, you did retain Cleith Harris to do a study looking at the assets that were in place and the current water demands. And so that will be coming back. It's not complete yet, but that is in progress.
Okay. Just wanted to confirm we were on track with that.
We are.
Do you know, will that be in June or
Probably
after?
not. June is going to be full.
Okay.
It'll probably be in a subsequent meeting.
Okay. One of the parts on our executive report were the Morro Bay wastewater. I know we've kind of talked about that a little bit, and there has been a lot of public interest in that. You know, I think that there's much of that area that's not in our purview regarding that project, but there is some connection there. And I just wonder if, there would be a way that we could initiate a letter of interest or something, that if the city of Morro Bay wanted to further discussions on a working relationship, or how there's alternatives out there that I think we really haven't discussed here, and I don't know if the city's discussed them there, but at least to not put this completely to rest, but to offer some interaction without intruding into their area of purview, to have staff at least enter a letter of interest that they could respond back and say, we would like further discussion from the Basin Management Committee, or some type of action on behalf of the Basin Management Committee. And so I thought that was a way that we could retain interaction but still keep the areas under each other's purview in perspective.
Yeah, and I think we can do that staff to staff, even without formal direction, because we've talked about it before. But I think it's good to keep that dialogue open. I believe Morro Bay is in the middle of a overarching water supply study. I don't know where they sit on that. The last I checked, they didn't have it completed yet. So that might be a good time to, again, reach out and say, we are still your close neighbor. Our distribution systems are only a few miles apart, and still interested in at least dialogue, even though we know our plant capacity is not a great fit for their needs. But at least dialogue, I think it's prudent.
Okay.
Keep our options open.
I think that would be good.
Thanks for bringing that.
Sure. That ends board. Any other board questions? Now we'll move to public comment. So please come up and...
Not a comment, just a quick question. Is the Broderson field receiving all of the wastewater, reclaimed wastewater from the sewer plant at this point in time?
And the answer to that is no, not all of it. But I know one of the things the board prefers is usually there'll be a number of questions, and I'll get them all at the end. So just come up and ask whatever question you want. I'll write it down. I almost never miss. But that avoids keeps the meeting moving. So I will catch that one at the end. Yeah. Sorry about the formality.
Lindy Owen, hi Rob, and everyone. I had a couple questions. Some of these were just general questions, but they apply to what we just spoke about. The Broderson and Bay Ridge disposal is currently taking all of the recycled water, but it is doing nothing to offset the groundwater pumping, which is common sense seems to be the one way that we keep that water on record for ourselves. Do you have current studies to see if saltwater intrusion is below the area that water will be perking down through eventually? Because if it is, I'd like to know what good that does us. I'd also be curious about the cost, the energy costs of pumping water that far. That's the farthest distance that we can take that recycled water. It's uphill, and so I just wonder about the urgency of actually looking at some of the closer areas for both energy savings and to offset ground pumping, which I think is essential. And if Morro Bay does have their new wastewater plant put in the area that they're discussing, I believe that I'd like to know if currently where will they be putting the treated water? Are they going to try to continue their outfall, back at the original location? Or because if we could take what we can take and the rest of it could be put into wherever they were planning on putting it, then it still is a very viable option that I think we should look at, because it lowers their cost and it lowers our cost. It becomes a regional solution that I think we all can gain by. If they didn't want the water back, that water could become ours, and it adds to solving our problems. So, and another question, you talked briefly about the fringe areas. The more I think about it, I would like to know if you can give a reason why removing the fringe areas benefits our basin management. Basically, removing State Park and Warden Creek and the other little area, they need to be managed anyway. So if the county pays for their management, then they do not contribute one penny to management, is what I understand it currently. But if they remained in ours, then we would have the oversight to help them. They wouldn't pay the same costs as we all pay if they're a separated basin. But at the same time, there may be ways that water is connecting with us far underground. I mean, the secrets underneath our soil are still there. So I think those were my questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Steve Best. I had some questions regarding the monitoring well and reviewing the mounding of that well, in the sense that the additional saturation of that area, the increasing of the static water pressure levels, is diminishing the natural filtering process of the soils as it goes into the aquifer, which will increase the amount of CECs and indicative disruptors that actually make it into the lower aquifer. And at what point is that area oversaturated and allowing those waters to pass through less filtered into our aquifer? It's important to monitor it, but it's also important to know that we're not contaminating our aquifer at a higher level than was anticipated. Regarding the Morro Bay issue, I think that's just buying into somebody else's problems. The plant capacity was designed for redundancy. Looking at the 100% capacity of the plant is not necessarily a good thing, because it reduces its life cycle of the plant and puts us at greater risk for spills and so forth. And also we should be looking at rather than having treated water as a discharge on that plant, but also potable water on that plant. Potable water being produced from that plant would produce the amount of water that's reintroduced back into the aquifer directly or indirectly, and also reduce, because it can be used for other purposes, reduce the amount of water pumping that's being removed from the aquifer. So it has a double duty effect on that. So we're not looking at the big picture. We're keeping ourselves blinded to the small items along the way, and I think we need to be not allowing ourselves to buy into some of the others' process, because we don't know. We have our own control. We're more of a residential community. Morro Bay is more of a commercial capability, so we don't know the levels of contaminants that are going to be in that water that we're going to be receiving from them, which also may compound our problem. So we don't need to be putting their dirt in our water system.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Eccles. I'm a resident of Morro Bay. I just wanted to commend the board and the chair for the direction given to staff to express an interest to Morro Bay in terms of coordinating and cooperating moving forward wherever possible. Now, there may be opportunities for coordination. There may not be opportunities for coordination, but we don't know unless we extend a hand to each other as different jurisdictions. I think up to this point there has been a lack of an overarching regional approach, and we have, as a result, lost some possibilities for economies of scale and efficiencies. So, again, I applaud you for taking that action. We'll see where it goes. It may go somewhere, it may not, but it certainly doesn't hurt to start off with the regional approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Jeff Edwards, and I appreciate Rob's report. I did want to discuss a little bit, and I'm concerned that the creek discharge project has lost a little momentum, and I want to bring that to your attention. This is a low-tech, low-energy project that has the potential for a very high seawater intrusion mitigation factor. It's stalled now because of the budget. Michael Nunley and Associates last time worked on it in September of 17, and they put together a budget of about $600,000 to advance that project. I think that budget can be tightened, for one. I think we can work on ways to save money and try to find or allocate costs and find ways to fund that project. Perhaps Rob has a moment. He might update us on the applications for earworm funding for this project. But again, it's the creek discharge appears to be a direct conduit to the lower basin. That's where we're realizing seawater intrusion. So it's been a long-standing project, and I would hope that this committee would elevate its priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, I'll bring it back to the board.
Great, thank you. I had forgotten to encourage everyone to state their name, because actually your name gets in the minutes, and it looks great. But I did want to respond to each question. There was one question about Broderson and whether it was receiving 100% of the effluent. Looks to be about 95% under current terms, and there's another leach field in the Bay Ridge area that's receiving a bit of effluent to keep environmental demands in downstream wetlands acceptably mitigated. And Lindy was talking about the perking area below the mound at Broderson, and I think we'll see some slides later that identifies the current seawater front as being further to the west than those mounds. So we still do expect some benefit from that water perking through the regional clay and getting to our lower aquifer. On energy costs, I can tell you that because once it's up to Broderson, it percolates at gravity. It's roughly equivalent to providing pressurized recycled water to some of our more westerly schools, because when you provide it to the schools, you have to provide it at pressure, unlike Broderson, which is at gravity. So those two are maybe roughly equivalent in energy. And that, again, ongoing discussions with Morro Bay. At this point, I think they're trying to decide whether they're going to put their water in the Morro Creek Valley and do an indirect potable reuse project. That's a possibility. Or give it to some of the agricultural interest in their area to offset pumping within some of their aquifers. So I don't know that it's a done deal. I know Morro Bay does intend to do some level of recycling, but again, I think ongoing dialogue there is smart. With respect to the fringe areas, I think the primary benefit of the boundary modification is to line up the official boundary as Department of Water Resource sees it with the boundary as this committee has established it at the court level. It just lines those up so that all the activities here can apply to the basin that DWR is actually expecting to be managed. Plus, many of those areas on the fringe have very shallow alluvial wells that are in some ways self-regulating. If they overpump those wells, they dry out their own alluvium. And there may be other reasons, but those are some of the key reasons. Mr. Best talked about water filtration through the aquifer. I think that was just a good comment to keep in mind, and we will have ongoing reports of monitoring results down gradient. And then we had a question from Mr. Edwards about the IRWM process. We are a listed project for the creek discharge project, but have not received any notification of further progress on that grant application. And I'd be happy to answer any of the questions that the board may have. Great.
Any questions from the board? I have just a comment on Lindsay's comment about moving water in the agreements, and I know you mentioned the district's position on the agreements, and Golden State is in a similar state. We're close to finalizing those agreements, and we're in a strong position to, once we minor details at this point, what I would consider for what we've worked through in the last 6 months, and so we're in a position to move forward with executing those agreements in a relatively short amount of time. So that's for the recycled water delivery agreements. The creek discharge, you mentioned that we're a listed project. Do we have any indication of when we expect to hear? What would be the next course of action, or when we expect to hear back on our application?
I would expect in the next 6 months. We also are continuing to reach out to other possible partners. We've really appreciated the partnership with the National Estuary Program. There may be further opportunities there. We've reached out to the regional board to see if they were interested in some of the monitoring aspects, because a lot of that cost was baseline monitoring, construction of new monitoring wells, all the lab testing. So keep an open ear out there, because we are looking for partners that might help to reduce the cost burden on that.
Yeah, because that was going to lead to my question. I probably should have asked it before you answered, but is there anything that 6 months down the road is fairly long time, but fairly short time also, but is there something we can be doing in the meantime that would position us that if we received a non-favorable reply, and what would be our next step? And as you mentioned, I think that's good to have partners and some of the monitoring efforts. Is there something that we could be working on today and help position us and kind of anticipate the results of what we expect to get back?
Yeah, we do have a work plan and a budget item this year that is very modest, so it won't get you too far.
Right.
We also are planning to continue to pursue some ideas that staff has about recycling some shallow perched water and stormwater in the community to augment our recycled water volume, to make more available for the overall recycled water management plan. So that's in its formational stages, and we've done some back of the envelope looking at that, and there's some promising elements to it, because we do have a lot of perched water zones here that water is simply too shallow to make our stormwater measures work effectively. We've got increased risk of liquefaction in some of our baywood areas, and so managing some of those perch levels by perhaps augmenting our recycled water flows is something that we'd like to bring back, but we're not quite ready for prime time on that.
Okay, good. Yeah, because just my thought is that if we weren't successful in the earworm application, that we'd want to continue down that path, of looking at that as a potential project. I kind of have an agreement that is an important aspect of recharging any groundwater basin. That's the way nature does it, and we should look at that option. The funding of that is, we've concentrated our funding on projects at this point, and not really, there's so much upfront cost before we could actually implement a project, I think is where kind of caused the stall for us, and so we're looking for some help in that initial analysis of the creek discharge.
Well said.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to move on to our item 7, our action items. There's 4 action items on the agenda. Will you please lead that, Rob?
Yes, indeed. 3 action items.
Oh,
on the
3
agenda
action items,
today.
sorry.
So this first is a presentation of the draft annual report for calendar year 2017. And just a few introductory comments about this. This report has been posted online. If you go to slowcountywater.org and look at the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the Los Osos Basin Management Committee. Or you can go to our Los Osos CSD website and see a link there. But you can get the full copy of this report. It is in draft form. In fact, we're not asking for any action today. Just an initial presentation. We'll bring this back in June, and perhaps we'll be ready to get it approved at our regularly scheduled June meeting. If not, we're going to encourage you to set a special meeting for the end of June so we can be in compliance with our court date. We try to have this annual report completed by the end of June every year for the prior calendar year. So today it will just be an overview, look at the report. There are a few items that staff's still working on, particularly in the area of adaptive management and recommendations, but a lot of the core monitoring data is here for the reviewing. So first, some brief slides that we show every year that display our upper aquifer and lower aquifer monitoring network. We do have what we call a perched water network as well, but I'm not flashing that particular slide up here. But here you can see the significant number of monitoring wells that monitor our upper aquifer. Some of these have instruments in them. Some of these we use for water quality, but we have a pretty good cross-section in the community. You'll see there with the orange dot, and I'll try to hover over it here. There it is. That's where the Cuesta by the Sea monitoring well would be located, and we're proceeding on the design and the permitting on that well, but we do hope to get another data point there at that critical location. The lower aquifer monitoring network is even more extensive. It includes wells that tap the 2 zones in our lower aquifer, zones D and E. And again, you'll see there in the same orange circle the Cuesta by the Sea well that's sorely needed to fill an information gap in our lower aquifer monitoring. You'll also see some wells out on the sand spit which don't necessarily get monitored in every cycle, but you do see some data there on the edge of the seawater front where you have the very, very salty water. This is a cross-section of our groundwater basin, and I'll point out just a few features because I know we have a few more folks in the audience who may not be familiar with this. In the light blue, we have what's called our upper aquifer. That's zone C, and that is the first aquifer that's used for drinking water, and that has a significant amount of nitrate in it that's developed over time. And so when we do go to drill wells into that aquifer, they normally have to either be blended or we have to implement nitrate removal, which is rather expensive. Below a regional clay, you see in the light green there, zone D, our first lower aquifer zone. That's really our one of the principal zones that we pump from for our lower aquifer production. For instance, the District's 2 major wells at 8th and 10th Street pump from that zone. And then underlying that is zone E, the deepest part of our lower aquifer. And below that you have bedrock. And when you're concerned about seawater intrusion, the deeper you are, the more the pressure that's exerted by the density of seawater impacts you. So when you see further slides, you'll note that seawater intrusion is at most of an issue in that zone E, that deepest zone, compared to zone D. This is a slide that we'll be updating annually, and it shows a moving average of groundwater production over different increments of time. And as you go from the left side, there's basically 5-year averages, and then the two right bars are for 2016 and 2017. And so you can see that our water use is generally declining. The urban purveyors actually pumped a little bit more in 2017 than they did in 2016, but based on cropping patterns, we're projecting that there was a little less crop use in 2017 based on the active patterns that we're seeing in the agricultural part of the valley. These are some brief slides I'll just quickly go through, and this shows the amount of pumping and groundwater production that we have from our westerly area. Again, you can see that we've really backed off of some of our coastal wells. The light green on top is our upper aquifer, and the darker blue on the bottom of each bar is the lower aquifer. So one of the things that we're seeking to do is to bring in more upper aquifer production, and the district has a well that we're about to bring online to increase the size of that green bar. That's at our 8th Street site at 8th and El Moro. The central area has a significant amount of production in both the lower and the upper aquifer, which you can see there. And there's a little bit of production from the perched aquifer, not much. And then finally the eastern area, which is almost exclusively lower aquifer production, primarily for agriculture in the eastern area. This is a rainfall chart that can be a bit daunting. If you look at the bottom part of that chart, it shows your classical rainfall by year. And you can see that in 2017, we definitely had some improvements. That's, if you recall, when we had a pretty good January-February period. In 2017, this last January, February, and 18 was pretty dismal, but it was good in 17. And then the chart at the top is this trend of rainfall as compared to the average, and you can see that we're on an upward swing right now, although this year is not going to help that upward trend. We hope that next year will be better for rainfall. These are aquifer contours that are in various zones, and I'm not going to make you all focus your eyes. I'm just going to give you some very brief comments that are important to keep in mind. The first is when you look at the different vertical zones within our aquifer, they all have different water levels. So that's one of the reasons we know that they're separated by clay layers that are relatively impermeable. So in the middle of Baywood, we have this perched aquifer layer that's shaped like a gourd. We call it the gourd. And in those areas, we have some very shallow water levels. And if we were to do some type of a recycled water augmentation, to be focused on some of these areas, because these shallow water levels really inhibit our ability to percolate stormwater on our individual properties, as well as raises the threat of things like liquefaction in an earthquake event. So that's the perched aquifer, generally not used for production today. Going to our upper aquifer, that's what we call Zone C. We've got water levels that were taken in the spring of 2017. And really the only feature I wanted to note is that there's a nice even grade that heads out to the ocean, which is where we want it. Water levels are sufficiently high at the coast to avoid seawater intrusion, and things look good in the upper aquifer. Here's what it looks like in fall, and I'll maybe just go back and forth one. There's spring, there's fall. It's almost the same. It changes very little. And so, again, it looks like under current conditions, the upper aquifer is fairly stable with our current pumping regime, but we, of course, need to be vigilant. Lower aquifer, you'll notice you see some numbers in there that may be a little difficult to read, but I'll read them off for you. There's a -5 here in the middle of the community. And so when we start to see negative numbers, we get concerned. And there's other negative numbers here. I'll see if I can get my cursor back here. Negative numbers in these areas where we're pumping below sea level. And that's essentially what's created the potential for seawater intrusion. Now, these, of course, are much better than previous years, and water levels are coming up as we implement these basin management programs and reduce our water demand. But those are the reasons why we have seawater intrusion. We're pumping below sea level at the coast. And fall, things tend to get a little worse. I just, again, flip back and forth. You see that -10 in the middle of Baywood. I looked back at 2016, and that was down to -25 in 2016. So definitely things are still bad, not as bad as they were here in 2017's report. I'm going to take some time on this slide because I don't want it to be misinterpreted, and I know folks in the audience would agree. This is the first year, and if you've been to these meetings, you hear us talk about the need to not jump to any conclusions for a year-to-year monitoring of our seawater front. This is a very dynamic system. We could have a few dry years, and that could make things look very bad. We could have normal or good wet years that make things look better. But this really is the first year that we're seeing what looks like a pretty significant benefit to the procedures that we've implemented so far, particularly within Zone D. We saw a pretty significant retreat of the seawater front, but we're definitely not calling the battle even close to one or anything like that. And here are the key reasons. That front in the westerly area is very sensitive to the pumping that we do in some of those wells that are in that direct vicinity. And we've really backed off on pumping in some of those wells. So part of this may be an overall relaxation of the seawater front. Part of it might just be a response to the reduced pumping that's more of a short-term response. So too early to celebrate, but there are encouraging results. Compare that to previous years where every time we gave this slide, seawater was always further inland. So we've seen a little relaxation in response to rainfall and reduced pumping. We know that in some of these wells that are sitting rather dormant, there may be some leakage from the upper aquifer. We're watching that in terms of the chemical ratios present in the water. And so, it's always murky because you're just basing it on point samples at discrete locations. We don't have that Cuesta by the Sea monitoring well in yet. That really would fill in a gap. And I'll just point it out here again. That gap is here in this area between this 162 and this 164. We want to know what's happening in that area. So cautiously optimistic about the results in 2017. But as we have dry years and we have to rely more on pumping, certainly that could change. So we'll just keep monitoring this over time. We'll do questions at the end here. Wanted to give a little information on groundwater in storage. This is a chart that, even with my experience in the field, can be daunting because we have a basin that's sitting on the coast, and the amount of water that we have in storage here is very different than if you're in Paso Robles or in another inland basin where you're basically mining that water in years where it doesn't rain. You're taking the water from storage and bringing it up for use. Whereas here in this basin, as we do that, seawater begins to encroach and take over and contaminate our fresh water. So it's not as easy as saying, oh, look, we have 123,000 acre feet of water available. We're going to last 100 years. Don't do that calculation. In fact, there's no way directly from this table to answer the question, if it stops raining, how many years will we last? You can't answer that from this table. In fact, we don't have a model at this point that can answer that. Our model is steady state. It will answer what will the trends be and what will the long-term results be of all our management measures. But we've talked about it at this committee that without spending the money on what's called a transient model that can take into account time, we really can't answer the question definitively, how many years do we have left if it stops raining? So that's something that's frustrating to me and frustrating to our folks listening. But so look at these numbers very cautiously as you look at how much water is stored in our aquifer, because a little bit of seawater goes a long way to ruining fresh water. Every year we have a number of basin metrics that we report on. One of the most important metrics is what we call the basin yield metric, and that is basically a measure of what percentage of your yield are you producing. So if we say a yield is 100, are you pumping 80% of the yield, 70% of the yield, or like in previous years, 120% of the yield when we were inducing a lot of seawater intrusion potential? So we have a goal here at this community of 80, and that's not just to be it's not just to be artificially low. It's to provide a necessary safety factor given the uncertainties in everything we do here. We wanted to be below 100%. So this year the metric is sitting at 75. As we bring on all of our assets, we expect that metric to further improve and hopefully even get down to 70, though we have met our basin management goal in 2017 for where our basin yield metric sits. And it results in really in this chart. So there's two curves here. In the blue, you'll have what we call our water level metric, and that is basically a metric that is an average of the water levels in our lower aquifer. We don't currently have an upper aquifer water level metric, but that's in development. But for the lower aquifer, that curve in blue describes the average water level. Up in the horizontal line near the top of your chart, you'll have our target. So we really need to continue to raise water levels. The trend is certainly looks good, particularly from 2000 on. But we need those water levels to go all the way up to 8 feet or higher above sea level in order to be truly safe from seawater intrusion, similar to some of the levels we see in our upper aquifer. So the trend is good, and that's resulting from our reduced pumping and our better management of the basin. So we want that blue line to go up. Obviously, that's a positive when it goes up. The red line we want to go down, and that is the measure of chlorides within our basin, and that's a metric that we developed based on some key wells. One of the wells is weighted by a factor of 2, what we call the Rosina well, very sensitive to the front. And so it spiked there a few years ago and has since dropped off. And we want to continue to keep a watch on this metric. And we will amend this metric over time as we bring on new monitoring wells. Certainly when Cuesta by the Sea goes in, you'll see this metric get revisited. But the data that's in front of you for 2017 is positive for both of these metrics, but there's still a lot of work to do. Not so positive on the nitrate metric. So this is a metric that's for our upper aquifer. And this is the aquifer that's been contaminated with nitrate over time. The scale on the left is nitrate levels, and I won't make you focus your eyes, I'll just describe it. That horizontal line here, the dashed line, is the drinking water limit for nitrate. And so there in our upper aquifer, we chose the wells that appear to be the most sensitive to nitrate. There are wells that are well below these levels. And so for our nitrate metric, we expect that as the wastewater project puts fresh, low nitrate water into our aquifer, that this metric should start to respond to that activity as a first responder. And so as you see the upward trend in nitrates, we expect that to reverse and begin to go down because we're at 3 times the drinking water level currently in that nitrate metric. I did want to note for the group that the county is currently mandated to deliver water at 7 milligrams per liter. That's below that horizontal dashed line, about 70% of that. The actual levels they're delivering are closer to 3, I think, is what I've heard. So we have some nitrate-free water, essentially nitrate-free water going back into the basin. That's 1/10 of what this metric shows, so we're hoping this will turn around, though the model showed it could take decades for that to occur. But we're all waiting for that first year where it starts to show some positive results. So next steps, we do have some action steps recommended that we'll be bringing back to you. One is to do some little additional wellhead surveying at some of these wells where we have information, but we're looking to get that more precisely determined. Of course, we want that Cuesta by the Sea monitoring well, that orange dot, and I'll just pause for a little drink here. And then we are currently working on, for your next meeting, a draft upper aquifer water level metric, primarily of wells 3, 4, and 5 that you see up there for the committee to consider. We'll have a little write-up for you and some trending. But that's essentially to make sure that as we're pumping more from the upper aquifer, particularly with Golden State's new nitrate removal system and the district's new 8th Street well it's coming on, we want to be watching that metric for the response of water levels on the west side to make sure we're safe in our upper aquifer as well. And then we're going to be working a little more on Chapter 10 prior to the June meeting to make sure we fine-tune our recommendations on that basis. So again, recommendation is to complete programs A and C as soon as possible. Program A is almost done. Will be done this year. We're about to be out to bid on our last project there. And to complete program C as soon as possible. To minimize pumping on the west side lower aquifer. Continue aggressive conservation, which is another item on your agenda. And then optimize the use of recycled water, which we're not there yet on many of these items. And then, again, if we can't quite get to approval at your next meeting, staff will be asking for a special meeting similar to what we did last year. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer questions from the committee.
Any questions?
I do have a couple of questions. I guess I'm concerned about the next draft of the document also, and you just addressed that, having enough time to actually do a review. I've been most of the way through this document, and I have a lot of comments about just spelling and grammatical errors, and I wonder if I should just present them directly to Cleef Harris.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Okay. On page 59, that's a grammatical error, but I guess I have, in general, questions about the ag water production that's mentioned in a few places in the document. It's in the introductory executive summary section, and then again on page 68, there's some pretty high-level figures presented for ag production, and I'm wondering how we know that. If I don't think these wells are metered, and I wonder how we know that to the level of accuracy that's presented here in the document.
Very good question. So there's actually a couple of different ways that you can estimate ag production. It's an estimated number.
Okay.
And having seen a lot of different master planning documents of the county, I can say it's probably one of the more extensive estimates in the county because it looks at actual cropping patterns, planted area, crop types, number of rotations. Often you see some very, very rough numbers applied to large areas, and this actually goes to a field-by-field level. So in the spectrum of estimates, it's probably one of the better ones that's in the county. There's no substitute for a good calibrated water meter, and that's something that has been talked about here and it probably needs to be talked about in the future. It came up briefly at our last meeting. In fact, statewide trends in some areas are looking closely at the metering of these types of productions. And whenever we fill out our reports to the state, we always make it clear that these are estimates for this part. The urban purveyors are plus or minus 2%. This is plus or minus. So that's a good question.
Well, I think then, and thanks for that answer. That's a great answer, and that's what I expected. But I think in the document, I would prefer that when there are estimates like that aren't for measurements, and especially that's a good example, this particular one about ag production, it's presented with a lot of significant figures, and I would prefer that the document would state that these are estimates, and maybe an error range also with that would be nice. But they're presented as facts, as solid data that had been perhaps collected someplace, and I'd prefer that it would say that these are estimates based on something.
Great.
And I have another comment along those same lines, and that's with the sustainable yield figure for the 2017 sustainable yield. In the same sense, that's presented as a fact. We can reference page 58 and 59 of the document. I'm a little bit uncomfortable about that being presented as a fact and not as an estimate. And also, there's no discussion in the document. This is a figure coming from a model, and I believe this is the I can't remember the name of the model. There's an acronym that CWAT model, and the basin plan is also very thin about this. It just presents this. It says that this can be, that we have calculated this, and it is this. And it's presented with a lot of significance, a lot of significant figures. And there's no range of error presented with this figure either. And I would prefer that this is presented. It's difficult. We can't just put a function here that it's equal to these parameters multiplied by these coefficients or something like that, although I'd prefer that it could be estimated like that. But I think we probably ought to describe where this is coming from a little bit better, and the potential for error, maybe a parametric analysis for sensitivity to parameters, if possible. And I know, here we are, we're a month away from trying to vote on this document, and maybe this is a little bit late, but I'd really like to discuss this and how we can improve the document this way.
And I think one thing to note is that these annual reports just come like clockwork once a year. And so if we do have items that we think are of significance that are not fully addressed and are going to require some processing both with staff time and here at the public forum, let's get those listed under adaptive management for the following year's annual report. So this document is ever improving every year. So let's try to hit those this cycle. But there might be language in there that says, one of the significant committee comments was this issue, and now we've programmed that for the following cycle. I think that just makes the document better when we do that.
Yeah, I agree with that. That it's a working piece, and we should add to it. We started out the first year, spent a lot of time and energy and cost in preparing this document, and then now on these subsequent years, we're going to maintain the same structure of the document and fill it in with the details. And so I think if that would be helpful, we could add that as a project. Just looking at the document, we do have a little bit of work ahead of us to fill in some of this information. I know, we have Golden State's teams looking at those, helping out with that as much as we can. But to get it complete by the next week, or the next month, we probably have some work to do. It looked like there was quite a bit of need for updating the information. But, one of the key things when we looked at the projects we were doing in the front we talked about the monitoring well and needing the monitoring well. Do we have a plan of or a date when we could anticipate completing that well and start acquiring data? Because it is just such an important gap in what we're looking at, and so I think, I know we're in the process of that monitoring well, but I didn't hear a date or confirm that date that we're still on track of completing that well. The nitrate levels that we saw, we did see that spike. Could be one of the factors I didn't hear is the additional rainfall that we had in 2017. Could be some movement of the nitrates. We're changing our pumping in the upper aquifer, and the additional rainfall could contribute to the points where we're actually taking that analysis. And just the comment of the looking at our front and the success, I think, I agree with your comment of be cautious on celebrating that front, but I think there's also, you got to take those accomplishments when you can, and the fact whether they're long-term or short-term, we're making decisions here on the basin, and we're seeing some reaction to it, I think is a huge accomplishment. We're taking action, and some things move much slower than any of us want to see happen, but the fact that, I've been working in this basin a lot shorter time than you have, a little over 10 years, and as you mentioned, the first time to see that kind of information where it's not a depressing movement of that front, that's an accomplishment that I'm happy to see. But once again, that's a cautious accomplishment, but I'm going to take it today. So I think it's good to have that in front of us. But the monitoring well, very important project I think we have on our plate to kind of tie that together and give us some confirmation. If there's an update you could give us on the well, that would be great.
Sure, absolutely. There is a challenging permit process for that well. We just got a proposal for some wetlands delineation in the vicinity of the well. We've reached out to property owners that will need to be on their property temporarily to construct that well, because we've determined through the County Public Works Department we can't be in the pavement, which I wanted to at first, but now that I've thought about it, probably better not to be, right? So being off the edge of the pavement, we've got setback issues and everything. It still looks viable, but we're working through those permits, and we'll bring back regular updates when we talk about basin infrastructure, but those are moving forward. I hope we can drill it this year, but we'll need to have great participation from the permitting agencies to get there.
Okay. And then if we're moving along and it doesn't seem like that's a viable location, we should start that conversation of what's our next step, as soon as we find that out. So, thank you. Okay, open it up to public comment this time.
No, this one. This is going to be on the annual report.
Yes.
Which is really broad, so let us have it.
I like broad. You say that it's going to take a while before we have any idea what the available water in the upper aquifer volume might be. And I know I've asked a number of times if we could just get a really rough idea of how many years left of current water we have. I think that really is the basis of how drastic are we going to have to get? Are we just going to assume that maybe a miracle will come along at the very end and save our butts? Or anyway, so I still think that that's really important to get forward. The discussion about the wells and not monitoring is ongoing frustration. It makes no sense if we're trying to balance a basin that you cannot step in and do there's an expense to it. I don't think the property owner should be responsible necessarily for it, to putting, what did you call it, the type of monitoring, just the volume monitoring on those, and then to have a readout once a year. And I know that I don't have the area, but there is some place in the county that is mandating the monitoring of private wells. So if they did it, there's no reason we can't do it. We're in a pretty dire situation where I think it would make sense to figure out how to do it and step in and get it started, especially because it's pretty much known that 15 to 20% reduction comes from those well users once they feel that they're part of a situation. So that would help us a lot. I wanted to ask, below what's the nitrate change over at the golf course monitoring well? That's below Cabrillo Estates, that's below the horses, and that's right on the golf course. That has always been one of the highest nitrate areas, and I wonder if that's changing because nothing else has changed since they don't have to participate. Oh, and the Palisades well, are we going to just go ahead and abandon that soon? Have we reduced pumping? It makes no sense that is the main well that apparently is drawing in seawater, and I've heard it asked before, and I'd like to know if there's any plan to shut down Palisades if that's that dangerous. It makes sense, especially since we don't have the other monitoring well coming very soon. Thank you.
Steve Best. Wanted to make a comment regarding the slides that we're looking at, the contour levels of the aquifer, starting with the contour levels in Zone D. That seems to be relative to the upper level and the lower aquifer level. It was just focused on a small outlined area within the core of the basin, and didn't go to the outskirts of both east and west of the basin's boundaries. And I wanted to understand, is this simply a pocket within the two clay lenses that are there? And if it are the clay diaphragms static or dynamic in terms of the way they're adjusting to the levels of the aquifer within those areas? It makes a difference in terms of how the water column is creating static pressure within those zones. And so if you're reducing the level of the lower aquifer, how does that affect the size and the capacity of Zone D and the upper aquifer as well? And how that might be increasing or decreasing the capacity or the levels of saltwater intrusion or nitrates and so forth.
Richard Margetson. The wastewater project, the original wastewater project, the purpose was to reduce nitrates. I know you touched on it, but I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on what you think the impact is that is causing it to go up to 32. The discharge from the plant, if it's at 3, septic tanks are no longer online. We had late rainfall this year. How do all those connect in an increase in nitrate levels? I think that's just as important as the seawater intrusion level. The project was forced on this community based on nitrates, and that doesn't seem to be the emphasis anymore. And if they've gone up that much with these other things already have happened, there's got to be another reason. And maybe you have a theory or something. It'd be nice to at least start having that discussion. The other thing that I'd like you to talk about a little bit is we had late rainfall, but what impact did that late rainfall have on the basin based on consumption at least for the CSD, is up this year. And so is production. So was that offset by a dramatic decrease in Golden State on their side on your chart? Because when you're showing the production and consumption levels, it looked like it went down. And for the CSD, when we met on the rate committee, it looked like it might be 10% increase this year in consumption. And there's a staff report tonight at the utilities meetings that's talking about unaccounted for water. This last year might be 15%, and it was 18% last year. So that means production was up too. That variance between those two numbers. I don't have the Golden State numbers, but maybe you do. If you could just kind of maybe wrap that all together and give us a...
Okay, no further public comment. We'll bring it back to the board.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I definitely heard Lindy loud and clear. In fact, many of my comments about that need for what happens if it stops raining were directed to those who really are interested in that number. It is frustrating not to be able to give it to you with certainty because we don't have that transient model, and the engineers and scientists that we work with just don't like to throw those things out with having some basis behind it. But we can definitely talk about the development of that transient model at some point, even though it is pretty spendy. As to the golf course monitoring well, it looks like that's sitting at about 19 milligrams per liter of nitrate, about twice the drinking water limit. And the only use of the district's Palisades well will be when we have to turn it on because tank levels are dropping primarily in the summer. So we do try to use that well sparingly, knowing that it does sit on that westerly end. But it looks like we're actually seeing just a little continued relaxation of chlorides in that area, but we try not to pump that well. And then Steve Best had an interesting question about the limits of contouring, and I just wanted to address that briefly. That we are contouring to the edges of the basin where we understand them. If contours are clipped or not clear, it's because we don't have data in those areas. But we did attempt to contour as much of the wet portion of the basin as we could and could understand. So as you flip through those, you could see in this one there's portions of the upper aquifer that are really unsaturated. We didn't contour through that because it's not water bearing. And we clipped some of the contours in areas where there's really not water that exists. So you see the upper aquifer is not mapped out to the cemetery. So there was really some science that went along with it in looking at the limits of where we felt comfortable contouring. Though I did want to note that those clay layers are static and at a fixed barrier to flow at a fixed elevation. Richard asked a little bit about pumping regimes, and I did go back and look at this in anticipation of that question. And the purveyor production was static with the exception of the CSD, which went up 50 acre-feet. It was the agricultural production that was based on cropping patterns estimated to be less. Thank you, Director Cody. And that was, if you look at the previous 2016 report, there is a significant decline in what was projected in the ag area. That's the only reason that aggregated bar went down. If you were just looking at purveyor production, we actually had a little uptick. But Golden State was flat, S&T was flat, district went up about 10%, 50 acre-feet. I believe that answers all the questions. Oh, God, that was the best one. So the nitrate is interesting in that if you look at the amount of storage that sits in our upper aquifer, it's very significant. You've got tens of thousands of acre-feet in comparison to the wastewater discharge, which is 400 or 500 acre-feet. So you have this massive nitrate sitting there already dissolved in the water, and so you feel a little bit like you're the drop in the swimming pool. But that's why it was modeled to take decades, not years, to get this corrected. But We do need to start seeing a trend, and we are going to keep talking about this. We've been producing more from the upper aquifer. There's been more rainfall, so there might be some transient effects just from that and pulling some of that pool of nitrate into where we're monitoring. But this is something that is going to be a hot discussion over the years. Hopefully, we'll all be here to see it go down.
Yes, thank you, Rob. Comments?
Yeah, I'd like to... Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You guys started.
I'd like to talk about the nitrate also a little bit. At S&T, we're very concerned about nitrate. We have a big part... Oh, man. I'm surprised you can't hear me even with my mic off. So at S&T, we're very concerned about nitrate. Our favorite well, our most used well, number 5 right now, is just below Cabrillo Estates. And it's screened as a lower aquifer well, but our nitrates are climbing to the point where we are faced with having to do some high-level treatment, and it's going to be very expensive. So we're very concerned, and I guess Lindy and anybody else who was wondering about that, the nitrate has been de-emphasized here, the discussions of nitrate on the committee, and I'm going to try to keep us focused on that as something nearly as important as seawater intrusion. They both have issues related to expensive production of water. And I think that also, maybe we should talk a little bit, Rob, about this idea about trying to identify a specific volume of water that's available. And this is a little bit dangerous topic to discuss in public, but what we have is we have a body of water that's pressurized by seawater. If we use it up, the quality decreases. There's likely to always be water available in the lower aquifer. I hate to say that out loud, but the issue isn't the volume of water available, it's the quality of that water that's available. So the questions about how much is available is really a difficult thing to discuss. And maybe what we should talk about is the quality of the water. The quality decreases as we produce, and with the rate that we produce at. See, I think that covers what I wanted to talk about.
Okay, thank you. Chuck?
Rob, can you explain to me the difference between this annual report and the annual report mentioned in the CDP that the county files with the Coastal Commission? Are they looking for the same data? What is this more extensive report? Do you even have the answer to that?
I think that report is a wastewater-oriented report.
Yes.
And it would focus on a subset of what this report covers. This report would cover all the different aquifer zones and all the water supply issues.
Have you ever seen the other?
I have. It's been a while. I should go back and look at it so I can have it apples to apples.
It seems like maybe something this committee should be looking at, too.
Yeah. Okay, good. We'll capture that in the minutes, and staff will go back and look.
Okay, thank you. So I think under this item 7A, we also had a potential special meeting date of June.
We have our regularly scheduled Basin Management Committee meeting, and I'll pull up my calendar here briefly so folks can have it. And that is on June 20 at 1:30. So let's make sure we have a good solid quorum on that date. If we needed to do a special meeting, staff will ask for feedback from the other committee members as well. County couldn't be here today, whether the 27th might be a possible date to do a follow-up meeting on just this item.
Right.
And the last time we had an approval in substance and still had a few lingering typographical type comments that got presented at the last meeting, but staff was given authorization to publish the report to the court as soon as those typos were addressed. We did that last year, so that's one possible avenue as well. But that's what we were thinking in terms of calendar.
Okay. So as far as confirmation of the 21st date, I know the county is not here to confirm that date. We can simply go with that date because that's our regularly scheduled date and stick with that. And if we receive feedback that they're not going to, I think it's important to have the proper representation for that meeting to approve the annual report and make sure that its content is complete. So we'll go with that original date of the 21st, pending any feedback from our regular board members or their alternatives of meeting that date.
Perfect.
Okay. Right. Wednesday the 20th, sorry. So I said the 21st.
Oh,
Excuse me.
20th, yes.
Yeah, Wednesday the 20th.
Thank you.
Let's get that correct. Okay. So that concludes 7A. We'll move on to 7B.
7B will be relatively brief. At your last meeting, the board discussed a water conservation update and set a tentative date for Thursday, June 21st to do, I think, a helpful informal forum here to talk about the new retrofit rebates that are available and to talk about the different technologies that can be used inside and outside to save water in the home. We now have a postcard. We've corrected the date on that card to send out to the different customers out there to invite them to this meeting. And the agenda for the meeting was previously endorsed at your last BMC meeting, but we did provide another copy for today. I also wanted to give you some of the totals that we're going to be reporting out at every meeting. And you see here in a table the total cumulative number of fixtures that have been retrofitted under the wastewater project as provided by the county. As of this writing, there's been very little activity this year as part of the new rebates. Only a few closed washers, people jumping after the larger rebate. I'm sure they appreciated that. But we are hoping to spur more activity. County planning staff has agreed to provide Title 19 data. They couldn't have it compiled in time for today. They thought they'd get it to us by next week, so you'll have that for your June meeting. But again, I don't think there's a ton of activity out there. I think everyone took a deep breath after going after their fixtures as part of the wastewater project. I did mention that staff is interested in, and I don't know if we do this with an online survey or a poll of people who show up to our meetings or a postcard, but we are looking for data points for how many toilets and fixtures are out there that are still at the high range of what is acceptable. I think there's probably thousands of 1.6 toilets that are back from the 90s, and one of the rebates that we have available is to go to a higher efficiency unit with a pretty cost-effective rebate. So still more work to be done on conservation. We've hit a plateau, and the awareness out there may not be what it needs to be. So we thought a good first step, and we thank Golden State for their very active help with this, would be to have a little community forum here in June in an evening setting to talk about conservation. So we're prepared to send that out and get folks out for it. Any questions or comments? Be happy to answer.
Any comments from the board? So my only comment is distribution of the postcard. We have the draft out there, reaching that final version, and then distributing the postcard in a timely manner so people can put it on their calendars. I think that's important for staff to ensure that we get that done and accomplished. The date for that is the 21st, and there's my confusion between the 20th and the 21st. Yes. The conservation, I hope that with these additional rebate programs, people do, we have reached that plateau, don't have as much just inquiries on Golden State side from what I'm seeing, and so really looking at that next level and the first step to that is the awareness, the communication, and then just trying to provide the easiest avenue possible for people to take advantage of these rebates and to take that additional step, I think, is important for all of us here.
Great. Well, let's perhaps our staffs can coordinate on sending that out here in the next few days, and let's get that in the mail.
Okay.
Although not too far in advance, right? Because then people forget about
yeah,
it. So.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Public comment on item 7B?
Lindy Owen again. There is still a question of the 2.5, more or less, the number moves around a bit, that was mandated by Coastal Commission to be implemented at the very beginning of our sewer project. And apparently the county is trying to settle the $10 million lawsuit for their malfeasance at managing our sewer construction with pulling money that was excess. And I'd like to know if this committee will consider writing a letter to the county and to Coastal Commission verifying that money has not been spent on what it was meant to be spent on. That would take some of the money out of what all the purveyors are looking at having to put in. And I just feel wrong. Everybody that pays for this sewer is paying that $5 million. We are paying for it, and we're not getting it. And so I still think it's a bone of contention that needs to be settled. It is conservation funds. It was meant to help save our basin as we built a sewer. So I would ask that the committee consider writing a strong letter to Coastal Commission, Water Quality Control Board, and to our county requesting that money be reinstituted and brought back to the community for these conservation measures.
Seeing no other public comment, we'll bring it back to the board.
Thank you. I'm sure that will come up next time the county's present as well.
Yeah, I agree that should be a topic we discuss when the county's here. Maybe we could ask them just for an update. They've been willing to give us an update. I know Mark gave us a thorough update last time. Maybe he could provide us an update on that. And I think there has been activity from the original discussions and that the county has provided to this board in the past. And so they were a lot more open and spoke about their recent activities. And maybe we could bring that back and hear from them when they're present.
I agree that they should have an opportunity, the county should have an opportunity because they sit on the committee I agree that the county should have an opportunity because they sit on the committee to answer this, but this has been going on for a long time without really a resolution or any specifically good answers. So I think I support Lindy's comment that barring a conclusion or sufficient answer from the county, I think that perhaps the committee should approach the Coastal Commission and find out really what it is and do an independent evaluation.
Thank you.
Okay. No other comments? We'll move to item 7C.
This will be a brief one, Mr. Chair. Every year, the minute I have the data in my hand, I try to get it out to you. And this is just a snapshot of what we saw in this April 2018, the monitoring event that we did. I tagged the 4 wells where there was actually some change noted. The rest of the wells, I didn't detect any change that I thought was worth mentioning. And so I want to just point out a few key items. The first is over here near the golf course. Oops, sorry about that. See if I can get my cursor back here. There it is. Over here near the golf course, a mixed zone well, primarily zone D. We did see here in this April a relaxation from last year. So last year was fairly good news. We saw a further progression of that good news. Not big. That's 14 milligrams per liter. But again, when we have a little bit of good news, we should be happy that we have it. It's better than the alternative. And the Rosina well, some further decrease at that well, which is here, down to 136. You heard a little bit of mention of the districts. Boy, I'm just doing this poorly, aren't I? Hold on, folks. I was going to say, should be have a laser pointer from current slide. There with the number that says Zone D 100 milligrams per liter, you see the district's Palisade well, which went down 2%, but it's not an increase. Definitely an indication that in that Zone D aquifer it's really in a submarine canyon there that sort of follows Los Osos Valley Road. And that's been the primary place where seawater intrusion has come in. We're definitely seeing some positive signs. Everyone should watch carefully at the top of the screen this Zone E well. Now, we don't produce a lot from Zone E in that area, but on the Bay Fringe, that well labeled LA11, we did see a little increase in that well. So that's a watch point for us in that deeper zone. So there's a little bit of apples to oranges here. You see a lot of Zone D results and then a Zone E result. But Zone E is definitely a challenge for us, that deepest zone. But all the Zone D wells are looking quite good from this April's monitoring. We're going to do this again in fall after going through a summer of pumping, and wouldn't be surprised to see maybe some reversals in this. But we are looking forward to reporting this out live as we get it. So that's all I wanted to bring forward today. And the tabular data is in the staff note and published online.
Great. Thank you, Rob. Any comments from the public?
Steve Best. You say there aren't any published reports on necessarily on the Zone E saltwater intrusion? And because it seems to me it would be relative to the static zones if increased usage out of Zone D would then naturally draw down on the use on Zone D levels. But anyway, I just wanted to see how those two are correlating, because they would naturally have some relationship to each other.
Thank you.
Richard Margetson, just a quick question. The rain event we had late spring, impact on these numbers, and if that had not happened, do you have an idea of what might have been the results?
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, I'll bring it back to the board.
If I could, Mr. Chair. So our Zone E monitoring is pretty sparse. We've got the well we call LA11 there that we monitor. The Palisades well, the district well, is no longer active in Zone E. It's been backfilled, so we can't monitor there. We have a Golden State well that partially taps Zone E, where there was no significant change that I could detect from the historical background. And then we have a Zone E well around 10th Street, which didn't change much, same level that it was in 2005. So the desire to have a Cuesta by the Sea monitoring well to further keep track of those two zones discretely, I think would be of great benefit. I was thinking about what Richard said as well. What would have happened if we didn't have a mini March miracle? Certainly you'd have more irrigation that occurred in March, and that means more pumping from some of these zones, as well as less creek flow, less recharge. I don't know if we can say it would affect us that fast. I'd have to say probably not a major effect in that short a period of time. I think it will help us in the fall. Certainly I would hope it would help us in the fall. That's speculation, though.
Thank you, Rob. Bring it to board comments. Any board comments? No, I have none either. So no action on that item. We'll now move to item 8, public comment for items not on the agenda.
I think I asked most of my questions. The one that I wondered about was, is there any fear of liquefaction from the Broderson disposal site? It is half of what it was supposed to be, or projected to be, but there was always that question of whether that much water being put on a clay lens that does have an angle would cause danger of liquefaction, and I know you talked about it a little bit at the lower part, so I wonder if you could address that.
Richard Margetson. Rob knows what I'm going to say about this, but there's a list of projects that you're hoping to accomplish in the future. I believe the CSD is going to have the resources in the future to pay their portion of those projects. I think it's pretty much guaranteed at this point, unless there's a dramatic reduction in consumption that would reduce revenues. But I think that's kind of locked in. Sunset Terrace has a minor portion in this. So I guess I would like to see that list maybe revisited and see if some of those projects could maybe be moved up a little bit, even if they were moved up in 6-month increments or whatever. If Rob can prioritize which ones would have the most impact. I know the most impact on the basin. I know the East Side Well is, kind of the highlight right now, but there are other things. And if the money's available, or it looks like it's going to be available, I think it's better to do them now than put them off.
Excuse me a minute. A couple different things here. Regarding the creek injection zone, I think any discussion of us injecting water directly into the aquifer through the creek needs to be done with just not treated water but potable water, because that's going to be going directly into the lower aquifer with the least amount of filtration through natural soils, and will have the most impact of whatever contaminants that do exist in that water. And if we want to be able to recharge our aquifer with fresh water, it needs to be potable water. It's not, it's one thing to have the creek feeding that aquifer through rain and so forth, but if we're injecting water that is just coming from the plant as treated water, it's putting all of those osmosis in too great of a risk, and potentially contaminating the aquifer forever. I think we ought to be looking at other alternatives as well. I've discussed in the past the ideas of having an aquatic center that could use salt water as the basis for serving that pool, using as much as between a half to an acre foot a day. That water then go out to a park that would help serve the community as a park, but it also would be a very dynamic retail, commercial, and a boon to the community. But also at the same time, it could be, there is money there through the state and other programs where because it's an outside-the-box application to reducing the saltwater intrusion, and that water then can be injected or introduced back into the aquifer, creating increased pressure on the putting that static pressure or the saltwater intrusion out to sea. And I think the other important thing is that the future of the Basin Management Committee needs to be considered as a single purveyor. In the interest of Los Osos, in terms of how we manage this basin and how we serve the community, both from quality water to economics of how that water is going to get to the community, how we're handling the processes in total for the entire community, and establish some equity in terms of fair share of the responsibilities of where the funding comes from and the benefit to the community. It would be best served at this as a single purveyor. And I know we visited this question before. It was shot down. But I think this is a matter of dealing in not just for the profit of owning that those areas of production, but looking at the best interest of the community and how this would best serve both the lifetime, the quality, and the community of this aquifer. Thank you.
Okay, see no further. Oh, I'm sorry, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, committee members, my name is Jeff Edwards, and I wanted to continue the conversation on a topic that I think is important and something that this body should be attentive to, and that is the numbers. There are numbers, a lot of numbers, when it comes to water and wastewater management. And in my work as a land planner, I deal a lot with the county's resource management system. Also, as you know, there's the Los Osos Community Plan that's coming down the pike. There's the recycled water management plan that the county has associated with the wastewater project, and the basin management plan. And I will tell you that none of those documents dovetail when it comes to the numbers. In some regards they do, but I'd say by and large there's a whole cross-section of numbers and they differ dramatically. And not that the numbers are entirely static in this business, but I think we have some numbers that are fairly easy to get our arms around. And I just think that it's important to have these various documents that are used in planning, certainly used in management of both water and wastewater resources, that these documents harmonize to some extent. And I know there was an effort some time ago on the part of the committee to try to update the community plan numbers, but it never really happened. And I'll use an example, as one example is our safe yield. And as your executive director mentioned, in the days of past, we exceeded our safe yield. That is the ability of our basin to generate a certain supply. And today, we are under our safe yield. In other words, we're not exceeding our safe yield. And our target is 80 for a basin yield metric. I thought we were a little above 80, but now we might be below 80. So, again, the bottom line is that the numbers are important. I think they should be consistent among the various documents that are used daily by both the county and this group. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other public comment, I'll bring it back to the board.
Thank you. Just a couple of answers there. Lindy asked about liquefaction at Broderson. Kind of took me back to 2004 for a second. That was unpleasant. But there's been studies, pretty extensive studies on that topic as part of the original environmental review and then the county's environmental review. They all concluded there was no increased potential in liquefaction, though it's not my area of expertise. But those studies are available if you're interested. And I think Richard's comments about our capital improvement is germane. We've authorized Cleith Harris to look at our current assets, the capital that we're about to put into service, current water demands, and see, based on the model, where we sit today, and revisit do we need 2 expansion wells under Program C? We know we need a monitoring well, and everybody's kicked in their fair share of commitment there. We'll bring back detailed budgets when we have them prior to construction. And then, of course, Golden State's already funded their first expansion well as their nitrate removal system. So when you look at the basin plan programs that are on the list, really the list is getting short. And based on this revisitation of our current water demands, we may only have one more well required to get to at least completion on this phase of the plan. Then we're monitoring, we're assessing, we're shifting pumping to optimize and adapting. But you're going to see that come back when we talk about the results from that Cleath study. And that's all the comments that staff has for today.
All right, thank you. Any further comments from the board?
Addressing Mr. Edwards' comments, Jeff, if you could come up with a list of just differences, that would help more than just say the numbers are different in all of these different documents. I mean, I know it sounds like we're asking you to do our work for us, but it sounds like you already have some ideas of where we might look. So be specific. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good comment, and I kind of had the same comment. So I don't know, Jeff, I know you've mentioned that in the context of the basin yield. You've also mentioned it about our conservation numbers and our overall demand on the basin. So if you could simply give us submit that in writing to us, maybe we could look at that, even evaluate whether that, I believe it would be an extension onto our scope of work that Cleath is doing with looking at our capital improvements. But, I think that would be helpful, that, when we develop the basin plan and establish these capital improvements, just having that fresh data out in front of us really helps us make good decisions moving forward. So maybe having this on our agenda next meeting, or not next meeting, the subsequent meeting, would be prudent for us to take a look at that, and then we could evaluate that a little bit further from a board perspective.
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That concludes item number 8. Our meeting is scheduled. Our next basin meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, June 20th. And with that, do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay.
I can second that.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.